Hi, Jared. I am
Hello.
in Richmond, and you are in Richmond, Virginia.
Correct.
So just for everybody to kind of know who you are, if they all don't, you are a creator. You make a lot of jewelry, but also now ceramics. You make collectible like stone coins. You're a writer. You are a biker. You practice Zen Buddhism, I think.
Correct.
Uh, you're also a father, a bread maker, like a bunch of things. I think that you somehow synthesize everything into one way of living, and I find that really interesting. So, is there anything I have missed that you would want to share with people?
No, you pretty much covered it. Dirt, rocks, books, bikes, food. That's pretty much life.
That's pretty good life. That's right. So, how is Richmond for you these days?
It's okay. It's much quieter than usual.
Yeah.
Um, Lately, actually, I think yesterday we just got a full shelter in place order for here in Virginia. So we were already self-isolating. My wife Suzanne and I both work from home, so we're pretty good at that already. Um, we've been practicing for this for a long time. Having my kid at home has been uh, a bit testy. Just everybody trying to get stuff done, and now we're doing, um, distance learning and trying to keep him occupied while trying to keep working and dealing with the economy and all the crazy shit that comes along with um, you know, pandemics. Woo, first time for everything. I just, as far as Richmond itself, the weather's been unseasonably warm. It's been beautiful here, although my wife is pissed that we didn't get any snow. We really didn't have a winter at all. I think it flurried a few times, but it's been well above freezing much more often than it's been below. It's been in the 80s here this week, which I don't mind.
Jealous. Oh, so I used to live in Richmond. I lived in Richmond for like 10 years or something like that. And I have to admit that I really miss the summers there. Like the really hot, humid evenings and going out for a walk and watching the fireflies and all of this is, I miss that so much.
Those
So it's
soggy
definitely,
southern summers.
yeah, I remember people like really complaining about how humid they were down there in the South, but I loved it. Yeah, I don't really get that weather anywhere else, but it's kind of like everything is built on a swamp there, right?
Kind of, yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What's it like in where you are?
Um, from what I gather, people are saying that it was an unexpected warm winter as well. We didn't get much of a winter. Everybody that has lived here much longer than I will say that we didn't have a winter. Um, but I definitely experienced winter. It's really cold for me and very, very gray. So I think we only get just a few hours of good sunlight, and then it's just dark or gray most of the day. I'm one of those like vitamin D deficient people. Winters are really difficult for me in that aspect, and um, but I'm also like a self-isolationist by nature, I think. I stay indoors most of the time unless I'm going to work. So I get most of my socializing and interactions with clients, and it's
Yeah,
been interesting
yeah.
to not have that.
That's the
Had-
big thing I miss about having a studio, having a place to go is being able to make those connections with people. Being stuck at home all the time, being a maker, I don't need to leave. I mean, I pretty much live on this third of an acre lot just outside the city. Um, so I'm a bit jealous in that regard with your, I guess, maybe not now, but previous ability to go out to the studio and have that little bit of socialization. I miss it.
Yeah, like staying away from people and not having that kind of socialization makes you a little bit weird sometimes. Like, not that you are a weird, incapable person of socializing, but then when you are in a situation where you are socializing with a lot of people, it's like it's difficult to, or I guess you don't have that practice of talking
Yeah,
more.
yeah, it could be a little overwhelming, kind of sliding back into conversation and being comfortable around multiple people. And yeah, that's my experience at APP every year.
Yeah, we've talked about this at APP too. It's like I think that people expect that everyone that's there knows how to socialize with everyone else, and they know how to have conversations, and that we're not like really that weird, I guess. And there are all of these like social media expectations of people. People have a persona online, maybe not intentionally, but most people, make a habit of only posting the highlight reel and not necessarily all the real stuff. That we're probably more prone to disclosing now, but it kind of makes for expectations at APP, I think. Do you find that also?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Yeah.
Awkward. No, just kidding. Another thing is we share the same birthday, August
Me
8th.
too.
Yeah.
I've always
Um,
been very happy about that.
yeah, me too. Like it's become like a tradition. Every year, I always think of like, oh yeah, it's Jared's birthday, and I'll send you a message, and I know that maybe I'll wake up to a message from you already, and it's always like, oh, that's really nice.
Yeah, birthday buddies. It's a good thing.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm kind of sad that we never had the opportunity to celebrate that together.
Yeah, I feel like we talk more now than we maybe did when you lived here.
Oh, it absolutely was not because I didn't want to. I was just like really intimidated by the whole like Onetribe enterprise. It was like I saw that as like the goal, having a studio like that and being surrounded by the history of body modification and the craft and more of like a hands-on sort of like earth inspired business and so I felt like I needed to really learn my voice in the industry first before I came and was like, so Jared, check this out. Let's work together or something. But
Yeah.
I left Richmond before that happened.
That's really interesting to hear because from my perspective, I built all of that with the help of a lot of other, really amazing people. But being in the middle of all of it, the perspective is completely different now. I mean, even now you say that to me and I'm like, that's ridiculous. Just come say things.
When I did, I was like,
but I guess I can understand that because I've had that. That's been kind of my outsider situation with falling into the APP crowd, half of the industry, because for the longest time I was not only retail only, but really didn't associate with any shops or any piercers. And so when I started making stuff that was geared more toward people who wanted to collect, people who were interested in things that were new, or even just people that wanted to have a dialogue about the way things could be versus the way that they are, starting to talk to piercers more at length and studio owners and all of that was super awkward for me coming in and being like, I know all of this stuff, but I know nothing about, what you do on a daily basis. And there was kind of a disconnect there. I had sort of all of the background and they had all the practical experience. And there were some bridges that needed building before we could really be in depth in conversation and kind of see where each other were coming from.
I can see that. At least my perspective of your trajectory in all of this was like from the BME crowd, like really involved in the suspension stuff and like the heavy mods and nomad type of practice, I guess. So I assumed that you had been a piercer or like were just around piercers a lot and like knew more of that.
Yeah, I had two really good friends of mine, Sean Phillips and Zach Zito. I'd been around both of them for a long time and talked and shadowed Zach and I had firsthand experience with the freehand stuff and with all the aseptic technique that Skelly was putting out at the time and all of that, but it was still kind of a bubble. And part of that was because everybody thought Zach was a giant asshole. Which he is, and he would admit it as well. But there was, I think, especially back during BME, there were lots of sort of outsiders and bystanders, and then several sort of cliquey, groups of people that had either known each other for a long time or really kind of took to each other online. And it could be kind of difficult to squeeze your way into those conversations sometimes.
yeah, for sure. I mean, I have like two different perspectives on that, I think. One being a bright-eyed young girl walking into the scene, being like, "I want to do this," and having the older, more experienced men being like, "Let me introduce you to everybody, little girl," And of
Well,
course, it sounds a lot weirder
yeah.
now that I'm like not that young, being like close to 40 now. And I think about that. I'm like, I really wish that it had been like the women in the industry who came to me and were like, hey, like, come here, let me show you something cool. Let me introduce you to all of these other women. But it wasn't that way. And having conversations with like the older crowd in BME, I kind of see why. I love the fact that I discovered BME Zine and that I participated as a lurker more than anything. And I read a lot of really amazing and inspiring stuff. Like Shannon's writing is still something that I refer to a lot. And I'm maybe it's a good thing that I never got to meet him in person, and I got mod blogged a couple times. So but the writing was really inspirational, and I think I gravitated towards that more than anything. Sean Phillips also, like all of his writing contributions, and knowing that he was in Virginia, it was, he was one of the people that I was like, I need to know this guy and shadow him. And I also never did that, and then I discovered your writing and so on. So yeah, I have like two different sort of like pictures of BME and what that was. It's difficult to reconcile, but like I'm not really that nostalgic for it, to
Yeah.
be honest.
Yeah, I'm not either. I mean, I miss the camaraderie, and there are a lot of people that I talk to on BME that I probably could talk to more now in different outlets or whatever, but it'll happen when it happens. It's not a priority. I was kind of an egotistical asshole myself for a while there back in the day, and BME is the place where the majority of it shined. So I squashed a bunch of beefs and made friends with some folks that I wasn't before. Alan actually being one of them, and he's one of my favorite people now. Like Origins, Alan. Yeah, down in
Yeah.
Africa. Hmm. Yeah,
Ah.
yeah, um, yeah. We were both kind of jerks to each other over various just stupid shit, industry shit. But now we're super tight. I've been on there to ride with him. You know.
Yeah, you share a booth at APP sometimes, right?
Yeah, several years in a row. Actually, it's our goal to share again this year. And of course, it's up in the air. I think at this point, as
Yeah,
to what's going to happen or how successful it will be for people if it does happen. But
right.
we'll probably continue to do that until somebody more exciting comes along or we get tired of each other.
Yeah, but it does make sense. Like the aesthetic of Origin like I can see why it was kind of difficult to have a relationship with Helen. I remember the body modification learning forum, and she was one of those people that was just like brutal. Like I can't send this guy a private message and be like, hey, dude, yeah. It's kind of difficult to talk to. So I can kind of see where that comes from. And to this day, I don't think I've ever had a conversation with him
Yeah.
that was like beyond like, hey, your jewelry's cool. Yeah.
Well, he's one of the sweetest people ever. So if you ever have a reason, don't hesitate to reach out.
Like there's so many people that I over the years just know in passing, and I'm probably one of those people for a lot of other people
Mhm.
there's just so much happening at APP that it's difficult to be like really intentional with your interactions in a lot of ways. And there's always classes. I've always been a volunteer also, so I had a full schedule all the time and I was running around. Now I'm focusing more on like really putting in the time to talk with the people that I really want to connect with and not being so much of like I need to know everybody and see all of that. So yeah, maybe it's just a maturity that I've reached that I needed to for a long time.
Yeah, I kind of did the same thing. The first year I went to Vegas, I got so drunk so fast that I actually rebooked my flight and left early, because I was so hungover and like could not function at all. That was like '07 or '08, and there was a bunch of weird shit happening with some people in a studio in Canada that I won't name or rehash, but I was there for that situation and it was getting real weird. And then I just got plastered and left. And then the next couple of years, I kind of did the partying thing as well and just wanted to kind of jump in and sort of be around everybody and in the middle of everything. You know, there's all the shit going on with the fist and the giant floaties in the pool that people are trying to coordinate, and just all these little things here and there that little groups of people are like, yeah, let's, you know, have fun. And I learned over the course of a few years that you can't really go do all those things and still expect to be a functioning human being. The year I gave my class, I was really good. That was the first year that I was like, I cannot party until I'm done.
That was such
and then from there on, it's been easier. And I kind of have adopted this mentality of showing up and just being wherever for anybody that wants me to be there. So I tend to just kind of drift between little crowds of people and a lot of times just kind of being quiet and listening and learning about people that I maybe haven't been around, or a couple of times I've singled out some loners. But what's really fun is people who don't know me at all. Just strike up a conversation and then go hang out and get dinner or something like that and sort of let it all unfold, you know. I like learning about people. I used to be a really intense extrovert. I'm not that anymore.
What happened that made you flip like that?
I think it's a combination of growing older and maybe kind of growing into some mental health stuff that either wasn't there or I didn't necessarily recognize previously, or maybe I was just too drunk to know. And marrying someone who is an extreme introvert. So with somebody who's an extreme introvert, you can't really meet them halfway, you know, if you're an extreme extrovert, because that's still way too extroverted for them. So I started spending a lot more time at home just around Suzanne and doing, you know, whatever, reading, writing, design stuff, and then just kind of being a maker. That's really had a lot to do with it as well, because as I've become more immersed in my work, different ideas and things that I'm working on, I tend to spend a lot of time by myself. And even when I had a larger studio and more people around, I really enjoyed that and I needed it, but it was really just the energy from around rather than necessarily interacting with them one-on-one on a daily basis. I've generally grown to be quite a bit more introverted. As far as like talking to people, I find I have a big problem with emotional labor. In terms of like, and I know this is going to sound horrible, it's really hard for me to care sometimes about what people think or care about. And it's not any kind of insult to them. It's just that for me, that stuff like never goes away. Like if I talk to you about something that's bothering you today, that's going to bother me forever. You know what I mean? 'Cause I'm a problem solver and I want to fix it.
Right.
So I tend to be really careful about interacting with people on any more than sort of a superficial, and I don't mean superficial in any kind of negative way, just like I tend not to get too in depth. I tend not to talk about emotionally engaging topics because it just sticks with me and it's difficult to get rid of.
Yeah.
I used to be a lot more open, I think, about that stuff as well, and now I realize sort of the mental toll that being like that can take on me, and I've backed off dramatically. So now I just live in a big box in my backyard and make things that people hopefully like.
Yeah, I can see that, but and maybe I'm reading into this a lot. I also see that get a lot of what you need probably from the outside world by just a really up close contemplation with the materials that you work with. And at least in my worldview, the kind of materials that you work with are very much alive, and you're sort of like capturing them in this space and time. And as a artist myself, like sometimes when I'm painting, for example, I realize that I'm having a conversation with the painting that I'm doing or the drawing that I'm doing, right? And it's obviously like my internal dialogue, but I catch that sometimes in your writing too, and like how the stones sort of reveal themselves to you and things like that.
Yeah, I think not just as a maker, but as anybody that creates something, whether it's paintings or, you know, something out of clay or stone or whatever, there comes a point where you get to be intimate enough in your knowledge of the material that it does become a dialogue between the material, your hands or your tools, and your mind. And it can drag stuff out of you. But let me put it this way. I consider it to be a working meditation.
Yeah.
And so when I'm in here, when I'm by myself, regardless of whether or not there's music on or what task I'm doing a task, but I'm also thinking a lot about everything. You know, it's even if it's loud in here, it's quiet, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's a place I can be where I can process, you know, emotions and feelings and things that are going on in the world in a healthy way. Just by interacting with the material is kind of the catalyst for getting all of that stuff moving and then getting it to flow out. I think becoming a maker really changed who I am as a person. You mentioned, you know, your experience with painting. That's the point, right? I mean, art for us, I think most makers is more about the process than it is the end result. If you're really getting lost in it, you know, if it's something that you're passionate about and it's not just you know, something that you're making for a contract or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, the things that we experience while we're making, most of which is very internal. I think they do have a profound effect on how we view the world. And a perfect recent example of that for me is switching from stone to clay. You know, I've been a stone carver for around about 14, 15 years now, something like that. And stone is, it's really hard, you know, that's a given. But it's tricky. It's really mentally engaging. It's very loud to work. It's rough on your body. And moving from that to clay, which yields when you touch it, was a mind-boggling experience for me. It was really bizarre when I first started working, not with the tool, but directly with my hands, being able to mold and shape something and get an idea of a curve or some kind of surface texture or something, not from a tool or from looking around, but just by touching and interacting and adding more moisture, taking it away, just these very basic fundamental changes in physical characteristics in it. It just rocked my world. It's really weird. So it slowed everything down. Everything has become a much more sort of meditative, purposeful process. And a lot of it gets improvised on the fly in a way that can't be done with stone, which I really enjoy. You know, the iterative nature of it means that if I don't like something, I can just smush it up. You know, if it breaks, I can fix it. It's not like working a piece of jade where I've spent, you know, 15 hours working on this thing and it just split in half. That teaches you shit too. You usually get real mad first.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so making for me in a lot of ways has been kind of a lifesaver. I mean, it's really influenced everything about my life, the way that I think about objects, coming into existence, and even down to starting to think about materials having personalities in the way that people do, and figuring out like, so with this person I can act this way, but with that person I have to be more reserved, and I have to like kind of ease into an important conversation. And it's the same thing, with a lot of the materials. That probably sounds like I really need to get out more.
I don't know, right? Like, I'm thinking about these things now more than normal because, I kind of take it for granted that I'm like this like loner, and I can spend a lot of time by myself, and I'm like really proud of myself for this, like being able to be comfortable being alone and all of this. But now in the current situation, with this virus that suddenly has everybody in the world like stuck in their house, and being looking at the other in a very sort of like you don't want to get close because too close is intrusive, and it can be harmful, and it's a very difficult situation for me knowing that I'm like compelled to do this now rather than having the choice to do it myself, and at any time being able to go out and do whatever. It's a whole new world. And I ask myself, what is the value of artwork when we're talking in terms of what is essential? Like what is the purpose in the new world for all of this? And that's been occupying my mind a lot. For me, there's a lot, right? For someone like me, I find so much value in this contemplation of a process of art making, right? But how do I express that in a way that maybe more people feel inspired to undertake it as well? Maybe it could be just something that starts out in conversation, maybe a conversation between two people is also an act of creation.
I think it absolutely is. I mean, a lot of when I used to do more mixed media type stuff, a lot of what I was doing was socially or politically motivated, and the pieces were really thinking visually, sort of having thoughts in real time and manifesting them as they came with whatever, whether it was book pages or ink or gesso or whatever. I think that having conversations between people is definitely creation, especially if those people are inherently creative people. And language is kind of magic like that. I think Stephen King, in his book On Writing, which is really fantastic. If you haven't read it, I suggest it. Right. I don't like Stephen King as a writer, but that book is really good. He talks about language being magic. And the reason that it's magic is because you can write words and make a picture appear in someone else's head. And you can describe it any way that you want them to see it. And you can make things happen that they didn't even know were going to happen. Art is magic, really. It's the most fundamental act of being alive is creating something, I mean, isn't that what we revere in most cultures, is the one who created? I think that's pretty powerful. And yes, to talk about sort of current events, current social events, who is literally keeping the world glued together right now? It's content creators. It's people who are making what they make because they are makers, and then turning around and sharing that with the world because they need it. We're having all of these stupid conversations about how much money people should get for relief, and they can't get paid more than they did when they were making minimum wage, or people aren't going to want to work. Like, fuck you. If people enjoy what they're doing and they're invested in it, then they're going to work. I'm working, I'm sure you're working on something, on anything. It doesn't really matter what it is. The point is that people are being active and they're using their lives for something that makes sense to them, to stay sane and do what they can to keep other people in the same space.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think that one of the things that was motivating me to have this sort of conversation with people who I know like can engage with this sort of conversation is that I'm kind of tired of going into my social media and seeing people be like, what's good on Netflix and board, but have this sort of like disdain for people who try to find a spirituality and different things based on faith, right? But for me, someone who's like at home and just I'm bored, I have to stay here until all of this is over, and then things will kind of get back to normal, and maybe I can go back to my job and jump on the hamster wheel again, and can go on with my life. And to me, that requires a lot of faith in the system that I'm not sure it is actually fulfilling its purpose. I
Purpose
don't see.
fulfilling is making money for people that value money above everything else.
Right. So can we really depend on that? And for me, depending on that system is a huge leap of faith. I kind of want to focus my time now, since I have so much of it, on really envisioning a different maybe way of collaborating with people in the future, of really thinking in creative ways, actually being creative with other people in community, and seeing what we mean by things like sustainability, for example. Like, how can we cultivate now in this moment where we're kind of stuck in some place? Like, what kind of seeds can we plant right now that maybe we can see the fruit of later on, when all of this might be like back to normal or something.
I don't want to sound like a pessimist or some crazy anarchist, but it's my hope that things won't go back to normal. I don't really like normal. There's a lot of problems with normal, and we're seeing a lot of them right now, play out in real time through, the government and all these businesses clawing for money. And like, small businesses and things like that, I get, but let's be real. If your company turns billions of dollars a year in profit, then you probably should have eaten less avocado toast and maybe
Exactly.
pulled yourself up by the bootstraps and, done a little more.
Right.
So I would not be at all sad if some parts of what we've been living kind of burn down. I think that there are way more creative, compassionate ways that we can be running a government, running a society, and interacting as people.
I feel that really hard right now. Like I think that many of us were seeing how we felt like the disparity between like normal people and the top 1%, which is really like the top 0.01% or some shit like that. It doesn't make sense for people to be able to hoard all of these resources, and ultimately, like, when there are so many ways that they can contribute, or that surplus can be turned back into the community to create more for as many people as possible, that it just doesn't make sense to me why we should be okay with a system that works that way. And maybe that makes me an anarchist too. I don't know.
I don't think that it does. I think that the flavor of capitalism that we have here in the United States is a very specific, special kind of capitalism that to a certain extent was what this country was built on. And I was thinking about this the other day, just to take a little bit of a logic leap here, because I've been thinking about this a lot while I'm stuck in my box. I really believe that the style of slavery that existed in the United States was the precursor to capitalism, because what it did was it stepped over that line in the sand of profit over people. We built a system that suggested, and people lived in a system that forced them to believe that some people were valued more than others, and that we had the right to exploit those people for the sake of profit. And even though slavery in that way is still illegal now, we see it in the for-profit prison system, and to a certain extent we see it in things like billion-dollar companies, making people work part-time, keeping their schedules shifty so that they don't have to pay them any benefits, or, avoiding unionizing, firing people for organizing and things like that. It all comes back to that line in the sand, that idea that, you know, that whatever dollars result from this action outweigh the harm of the action itself. And that drives me fucking crazy.
I mean, you just listening to a certain political figure in the media actually saying a different version of that, just volunteering people to sacrifice their lives for the economy was like, if I hadn't seen that myself, I would have thought that no, this is like social media memes, just like taking things to the extreme. But like,
isn't that some crazy shit out of a dystopian movie that we definitely all saw in the 80s and the 90s? Like,
right? I feel like we are in one of those movies that we were all like, oh shit, that shit just happened. You know, that's foreshadowing something really crazy that's gonna happen in this. You know? But this is like the reality that we live in, and maybe there are a lot of people who don't live in the United States who are looking at that and like, oh, America's fucked, you know? But like, obviously, borders aren't really a thing, you know, like this virus, it took 3 months for this virus to reach a worldwide level, right? Like, I think that we're just a really large network of people all over the world. Sure, we have differences in environments and things like that, but you can't close borders, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to deny the basic fundamental fact that everything is interconnected and interdependent is to just set yourself up for a whole shitstorm of bad stuff. The last 20 years of our lifetime has just been a whole shitstorm of bad stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I mean, the country that we're from has been at war more years than it hasn't for the duration of our specific generation's life, you know?
Yeah.
How much has that really affected us? Isn't that bizarre?
Right.
You know?
I also realized that I have this like trauma response imprinted in my body of like sort of shared catastrophe, because like when the gravity of the virus kind of like hit me on a really like, oh shit, like this is serious level, it reminded me of when I was in high school during 9/11, and I was like kind of frozen, and I was contemplating like, what do I do if shit hits the fan? I was in TC Williams, and under TC Williams there are these tunnels that were built who knows when.
Oh, wow.
And I used to go there, you know, to partake in some peace piping.
To do this?
There you go. Yes. And, you know, in DC, that was a thing. So we would skip school and go into these tunnels. And like when all this happened, like my mind was like,
Whoa.
okay, like I know where to go. Should I tell my classmates about this? You know, or like, should I teach? And I remember that feeling of like, huh, you know, this is the event. And now with the virus, I also had that feeling of like that sinking feeling of huh, this is the event. What's worst case scenario? Like, where do I need to go? What do I need to do? Kind of feeling. And you know, that's a really heavy thing.
See, going back to the movie we've all seen thing, as you were describing finding the tunnels and trying to decide whether or not you would strategically make that information public to any number of people, I'm just seeing like those mid to late 2000s sort of disaster shows like Jericho and stuff like that. They do really suspenseful single episode stuff that we used to watch, where the world is ending and shit's crazy and everybody's, you know, banking against each other and making secret alliances and shit like that. That's how I see you down in your tunnel.
Well, it was more of a fight of like, if I tell them, then I, you know, and maybe this isn't a big deal, then they know about my secret like hiding spot.
No, I totally understand.
And maybe I don't want to let everyone know like where I hide out. But having to admit that to a lot of people might have gotten me in trouble in high school.
Yeah.
also like really thinking like who do I want to take with me, right? Like looking at my classmates and being like, okay, how do I approach them to tell them like you should come with me? That there are, there's this bomb shelter under the school or something like that. I don't of course remember it, but I ran and I went into the tunnels by myself and waited, and like I couldn't hear anything. I was like, okay, so we're not being bombed. I mean, TC Williams is also like about 10 minutes away from DC.
Okay.
So I actually felt the Pentagon being struck, and when I looked, yeah, and when I looked out the window, I saw like this cloud of smoke coming from that direction. And I was like, I think that DC is getting attacked. And people were like, no. And then on the television, we hear that, the Pentagon got hit. And I was like, okay. And this is when I was like, I just got up and I was like, I'm leaving. And I went into the tunnels and I like waited to see like what would happen. Yeah. I didn't hear anything. So I came out and went home. My dad was pissed. So that was a thing. Yeah.
Wild. Yeah, we've as this stuff has been happening, I've been mulling worst case scenarios. I think any smart person, at least is mentally planning ahead a little bit, like what would I do if, some crazy shit happened, the power went out, or, this would be a great time for a terrorist attack. Imagine that.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I think there was a guy that was planning one, but he had been in the process of planning something for a while anyway, because the FBI or whatever already knew about it.
Yeah.
But we've got, my family is 3 hours away to the north. Suzanne's family is an hour and 15, 20 minutes southeast. And, like, how much resources do we have here? Well, we have city power, we have city water. If infrastructure gets attacked or for some reason that stuff gets shut off, then we're on our own. So let's store some water. And then the next stage, like, what if shit starts getting shut down or civil unrest starts to happen? Well, maybe a rural area would be a better place to be, but then you're severely lacking resources. So it's, if we do go down to the farm and like button up down there, what do we need to take? What do we need to find along the way, or make sure we can barter for, or whatever, I'm sure a lot of us have all of that shit running through our heads.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sure lots of other people are just kind of sitting in front of their screens with their heads on their desks because they've been in cubicles all their lives and never really thought to take anything, seriously in terms of, preparation and really thinking about like, how do I fend for myself?
Right. Well, maybe not even having the opportunity to do that, like some people work more than 40 hours a week and are living paycheck to paycheck and
well, sure, that's definitely true.
It's, I mean, at least I know that, and sometimes in my life when I've had like 2 jobs or more, like the only thing I had time for was to just warm something up in the stove and like get to work and do the thing and suck it up until things got better. And luckily they do, but that's also my personal struggle and not something that is a worldwide catastrophe like this.
Well, I think
say hi.
Hi there. I've been particularly worried about people in other places that don't have it as fortunate as we have here, or probably as you have there.
Oh, yeah.
We both live in first world countries with absolutely enormous economies, and to some extent social support. But there are lots of other folks in other places that have nowhere near anything like that. I mean, that's actually one of the things that really struck me about travel, traveling to Indonesia, throughout Southeast Asia, and particularly like into the villages farther away from the tourist areas where life is much more like it used to be than like it is now. Technology skips beats, so to speak. So I don't have a workshop in Indonesia anymore, but the head artist of my workshop in Bali, he never had running water in his house, but he had a cell phone,
Yeah.
So these things that like make commerce and connectivity available sort of percolate throughout the world much faster than a lot of other technological advances or things that we just kind of take for granted, like plumbing.
Yeah.
And so I think we have, a lot of people probably have expectations or assumptions about the way other places are. They're very different from the way that they really are to live in.
Oh, yeah.
I can imagine living through something like this and not having regular access to fresh water.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a death sentence. That's terrifying. And we're in a really privileged position to be able to walk through our houses and go wash our hands or get clean water, to clean our wounds with or whatever we need. Whenever crazy shit is happening, those are the people that I think about first and most often, in large part because I think it helps keep a healthy perspective on the way things are for myself. I think it's really easy for us to get caught up in the sort of first world problems, so to speak. And because that's most of what we deal with, we allow them to, I think, sort of grow to a proportion in our heads that's bigger than they really are. And maybe that's the epitome of a first world problem. But keeping in mind that there are a lot of other people in other places that are struggling dramatically more than we are here, I think is an important perspective to keep.
I have like this strange relationship with things like that. I was born in Bolivia, and family was very, very poor when I came into the world. So I have a very early memory of how we used to live. I never saw it as like, at least I don't remember ever thinking that we were poor until I started going to school. But things like, running water and things like that didn't exist in my household until much later. And I remember when that happened too. And so like, I guess I've always romanticized that kind of life. When I go back to Bolivia, I go back to the town where I grew up, and it's still very poor, but everybody has a cell phone, and everybody has a Facebook page, but then even further out, where I really like to go, you see like these towns of people who are living in like mud houses, and they grow their own crops, and they have like their dog, their families are all living there, and they have like these immense parties like every month or so, and you hear they have like this marching parade, and they play like this like really beautiful music in the mountains, and like they've been living like that for ages and ages and ages. There's a part of me that finds a lot of value in really having an intimate relationship with what is essential for life, having this community around you that shares those values and intricately connected with each other to the point where you all kind of depend on each other in a way, and knowing that you want to stay living this sort of lifestyle so that you're not, out in the city or anything like that. I think that there's a lot of value in also living like that, and I wouldn't feel sorry for them. I don't. When I see them living their lives the way that they do, I kind of feel sorry for myself.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
It's been my experience in interacting with people who are living in that way that almost without exception, those people are happier than anybody that I know here, living in this experience. Yeah. And I think a lot of it is because they value what's important, because to a certain extent that's all they have, but it's also all they need. Yeah. If you're content and you're fed and you have a social network and you're warm enough or cold enough, depending on the season, whatever, I don't think there's any reason you can't live a perfectly happy and fulfilling life like that. And that's something that I've definitely gravitated to over the years. And again, my experience with traveling, seeing people like that, coming from the States and having just started a business, I started Onetribe when I was 20. I started traveling, I think, like late 21, early 22. And then started traveling to Indonesia around that time to work with the artists down there. A couple of years in, the business was super successful. We had lots of really successful designs, and I was making more money than I really needed. And I still wasn't happy, you know. And I was traveling around, you know, trying to see a little bit more of the world and figure out what else it was that I needed. What, you know, what was I looking for? And I had the realization that I was looking too far and that everything that I needed was really already right around me, you know. And a lot of that was being blinded by, you know, the excitement of running a business and capitalism and being successful and, you know, go do whatever I want today. I mean, there was a time where, you know, my life was like that, and it was awesome at the time, but that's also the time where my brain was just going crazy and it wanted to eat itself, you know, and I was not having a good time physically or mentally, despite the fact that I felt like I should be the happiest person alive. But getting a chance to live in that way which you speak and to be brought into somebody's family and experience that, it completely changed my perspective, my outlook on sort of what my business meant for me and what I needed to live. And that transitioned really conveniently into the sort of maker aspect of all of it, because that requires a much narrower sort of field of view. Yeah, it's been a wild ride, and I'm really happy that I had the opportunity to go visit those people and be in those places, and you know, and to meet people like you who have lived lives that I couldn't imagine. Made me a better person, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think I think it's important to experience that at least, you know, in a some level, especially coming from first world places like this. And I always come back and I'm like, wow, that was a really long journey. Like I've come a long way, and you know, this is I feel really fortunate. I feel very rich, and I have everything that I could possibly need, like all around me right now. And being isolated and like being forced to stay indoors, I am more often than not like really grateful that I have everything that I need right now. Everything changes. Everything is constantly in flux, and it's going to take a lot of creativity, I think, to come out of this and you know, find things to be grateful for. That's going to be a thing.
Yeah, that's an exciting proposition for me, is coming out the other end of this, hopefully with some being able to look around and see changes in other people. I mean, I fully intend to just be relentlessly creative and unpredictable, because that's my life goal now. But it's my hope that, you know, the more I share and the more I talk to people and the more I sort of cheer other people on when they're having little moments, little blips of stuff like that, it's my hope that we'll come out the other side of this with people questioning a little more of what the status quo has been and what it could be. You know, in particular, like, you know, right off the bat, the value of the arts. We're kind of gluing everything together right now. People sitting at home and all they've got to do is read books, watch movies, you know, absorb whatever media they can find. And it was people like us that made all of that. Despite that, arts funding is being canned all over the place, and kids aren't getting, you know, really what they need in order to be like intelligent, functional, creative, fiery people that can solve problems and run the world.
Right.
Right. And that's what we need. Is, I think the biggest problem right now is that our parents' generation is so fearful of progress that they will not let go of the reins. I mean, I'm almost 40 years old, and I feel like I've never really had a say in anything, you know, that's going on, unless it was like hyper local and we were running that shit, you know?
Yeah.
I feel like it's been really difficult for our generation to get into any sort of position where we can steer some of the ideas that we have about our experiences and the way that we've grown up. It's constantly overshadowed by fear of the new and xenophobia and profit over people and progress for the sake of progress instead of looking at people and saying, what do people need? How do people,
Right.
you know, what's affecting people and how can we solve that? And I think that's on a lot of people's minds right now. So from my perspective, I'm really hopeful. Maybe that's a bit too idealist or optimistic, but
Maybe, but like I don't see any other option. I mean, do you really think that there is another option other than being optimistic and hopeful, like through all of this? What is the other option?
people still just wanting the status quo until, things go down in flames.
I think that like we're in flames in in some ways, right? Like, I mean, this isn't also something that just came out of nowhere. A lot of institutions were weakened to where even if this was predicted a long time ago, uh, the validity of these institutions was undermined by people who wanted to stay in power, for example. Um, so I think that something like this was a long time coming. It's almost like if it could happen any other way, but for nature to be like, oh, genetic mutation in this virus, and we put it in people and see what happens with their networks. That's one way of like really showing people how vulnerable and how fragile everything that we hold to so strongly really is. But I think that like falling into despair and uh, sitting in front of a screen and just like entertaining yourself through it is probably not really an option. Or at least I'm like you. I would hope that people are questioning more and maybe even getting a little angry and turning that anger into some sort of like forward momentum rather than staying in this frozen state of like, what the fuck?
And just
Um,
bitching about it on the internet.
right, right. And I mean, I'm all about it. I love to bitch on the internet. I love to get into arguments with people about like different topics. I'm a scrapper on the internet. No apologies. Um, but yeah, what I would want, at least for my community, if I'm a part of one, is to take this opportunity to really be intentional with that community building. I mean, we're all like sprawled out in the world, but we have this technology stuff, right? The internet was built or it was promoted in a way that allowed us to do something like this. Like, we have some tools, we have some resources.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've had conversations with a couple of people recently about the internet now, how it used to be. And I remember having, like ICQ and messenger lists full of people that I made it a point to talk to every day, like real relationships with people that were caring and compassionate, and being in like IRC chat rooms where if somebody didn't show up, we called them, like, hey, are you okay? What's up? And the internet has become such a more, I guess, democratic and open place, which seems like a good thing. But I think the people that were on the internet originally had something specific they wanted to get out of it. They wanted to communicate. They wanted to make meaningful relationships with people that they couldn't do it with in person. And
Yeah.
now people just kind of shoot shit out into the void because they know that someone somewhere will see it. There's a really big difference in the way that those two kinds of social interactions work, because one is really pretty antisocial.
Yeah.
And I think that the majority of the behavior that we see on the internet is not social in terms of meaningful interactions between people. It's people just shooting shit out into the void and like fishing. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, totally.
it's super
But
weird.
also I would not discount the idea that a lot of what people are tossing out into the void is uh, prefabricated and a lot easier to propagate than anything, say, authentic. Like,
Yeah, this stuff is designed that way. I mean,
yes,
viral has a there's a reason things go viral. There's a science to it. It's not just oh, that's funny. It's going to get shared by 10 million people, you know.
yeah. Also, people have jobs creating this viral content that is, just clickbaity kind of stuff. I understand how that really can be seen as a form of entertainment, but a lot of that is sort of like turning the internet into what television was, a sort of like passive experience of just watching things happen before you.
Yeah, that's
And
a really interesting observation.
yeah, actually, I don't think it's mine. I have to admit, there's this really awesome podcast that I've sort of been clinging to for the last like year or so. It's called Team Human,
Okay.
and it's by Douglas Rushkoff, and he was like into all this technology stuff before maybe before I was even born. Um, and he has a very, very interesting perspective, which I find not just hopeful but realistic also. I would highly suggest that you listen to that. I think you'd really like it actually. He talks about sort of like what algorithms are and how they're designed, and we're sort of like told that these algorithms are not biased, but they are programmed and they're created by
Oh yeah.
people who have biases,
Yeah, absolutely.
and there's a reason why they tend to expose people into more and more radicalized ideas of what beliefs that they already have, or maybe they're centrist and then they become radicalized by this content. Um, so yeah, these things are not neutral.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of us lose perspective of. You know, I think a lot of us do view the internet as a sort of a neutral space where we're sort of floating around and interacting with things at our will and kind of do whatever we want. But there's so much of it that's, kind of curated, put in front of us for specific reasons or made specifically to get us to react in certain ways. It's really quite manipulative.
Of course, and that's why a lot of it is political and why a lot of it is like, if you're a Democrat, the other becomes this abstract Republican conservative person that, has nothing to them other than these things that you completely disagree with. The same way the other way around,
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting too. Yeah, that's weird. That reminds me of the way that people view meat. We know the meat in the supermarket comes from an animal, but how many people actually think about the cow?
Right.
You know what I
Yes.
mean? Or the slaughterhouse, or the way it was raised, or whatever. It's just it's removed from all of the stuff that people would view as negative on purpose in order to just get this clean transaction of, here's meat, you eat meat, let's trade money for this object. It's not even an animal. That was the first thing that popped into my head when you're talking about politics and the idea of viewing this other as this sort of idea of a political opponent and not a real person, on the other end of that argument. Let me
Yeah.
go run and grab a dry erase marker real quick so I can write down the name of that podcast.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
I'm sure anybody that comes to my shop thinks I'm a crazy person because I have writing all over the windows.
Oh, do
Um,
you?
oh yeah, they're just yeah. I like shop ideas. I keep my lists for like materials I have to buy or like bullet lists of new ideas to try, and I just cross them off. Constantly erasing shit and rewriting weird stuff about, I don't know, particle physics and dendrites and all kinds of wild shit that comes into my head.
Yeah, I would love to know what you think of it.
Okay, yeah.
Because I think that you could get a lot. It opened me up to this idea that we can inject our consciousness into the machine in a way that's like more on our side, not this idea that maybe we can like inject our consciousness into a robot and then go to Mars or something like that. Um, I don't find something like that attractive. For example, I feel like being human does tie you to the earth. Like the etymology of human is like humus or earth. So we come from earth and we're tied to it. I don't know if human can persevere, or like procreate or anything beyond that. I think it's a nice thought. We could like colonize Mars or something like that. But do I really want, to colonize Mars? I think that Earth is pretty fucking cool, and I like the perspective. And aside from all of this horrible stuff that goes on, I mean, I would just love to have another sunrise at a beach somewhere, like climb another mountain and cultivating things, putting my hands into the earth and like making my own food and things like that. You know what I'm talking about. You do
Yeah,
stuff.
absolutely. The stuff that gives you physical connections to people and place. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You're getting into some pretty existential ideas there about consciousness and machine learning, and that's like most of the anime that I watch. It's like right up my alley.
Oh, I think it's a really interesting thing to talk about. Like, is consciousness something that we can that it can exist outside of a biological capsule or something like that? Like, I mean, we can get really philosophical about that too.
It's my belief that that consciousness is biological and also an inevitability. If it's always been, well, you've read some of the stuff that I've written for The Point about interconnectedness, interdependence, and topics like permaculture and stuff like that.
Gosh, yeah.
It's always been my belief that you can very plainly look around at animals and trees and the way that soil functions as networks and see that this all did come from somewhere, and with some gaps, because we really don't know. You can pretty much trace it back and look at, this came from that and this came from that, and get a pretty vague idea, but still an idea. It's always been really obvious to me that we belong here, that we came from here, that we are attached to here, and that we should probably pay more attention to that relationship.
Right. 100%.
And I've felt that way since I was a kid. It's just been like I woke up one day and looked around at the way the world worked and was like, why is all this shit backwards?
Yeah.
And I've grown up my whole life feeling like that. Like there was some kind of connection that other people were missing, or that there was some, memo that everybody was supposed to get. Did not propagate freely. But the truth is that it's been built this way. It's not a mystery. It's easy to look at and see.
Yeah.
The sad fact about the United States, in my opinion, is that we're never going to get anywhere when there's a large group of people who think that there's an end time scenario that involves everything going to shit.
Yeah.
How do you plan or fix anything? You know what I mean? Like, how do you even function as a forward-thinking society when that's the end game in so many people's heads?
I feel like that is the working principle of maybe Western civilization currently. It's not just the United States. I mean, from a religious point of view too. I mean, you have like the Church of Latter-day Saints. You have just like all of these evangelicals talking about like the coming of Christ, so that they can live through this like end of time scenario. And that's also, it's interesting. I was just listening to a podcast that was talking about this, how even science is sort of looking at things from that perspective. Like Newton, for example, you have this idea of the science that came after Newton and things like that. But did you know that he was like, he was preparing for the end of days
No.
on a, yeah. Even like people like Greta, the Extinction Rebellion. Yes, like that entire movement is also about the end of days. I think a lot is just operating under the assumption that we will come to this point where it will be the end of days. But just looking at the history of Earth, as matter, I think that we've had a lot of like extinctions, right? We've gone through a lot of, and we honestly don't know how old mankind really is right now. It keeps being debated, and there things get discovered that sort of like push back the timeline a bit more.
Yeah.
Um,
So here's where my Buddhist perspective comes in. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how we got here or what the purpose for being here is. You're suffering, you need to fix it and let everything else run its course.
Yeah. I mean, no, it really doesn't matter. Good. And you can see that I think in two ways. You can be like nothing has inherent value or meaning, and therefore everything is permitted and it doesn't matter. But you can also see like, okay, it doesn't matter, but that's a good opportunity for creation, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, that to me, that's my perspective. Like, yeah. It doesn't do any good to concern yourself with stressing out about things that you can't fix or figure out. If you're on a journey to discover information, then that's fine. But there's a difference between that journey and negative, obsessive thoughts and actions. That's a form of attachment, in my opinion.
Yes.
So there's so many other more important and interesting things that we can put our collective energy toward than being terribly concerned about what the purpose of all of this stuff is. Because even if there is one, we only have one life to live. Might as well spend it doing some stuff that, makes you feel good while not harming anybody else.
The golden rule.
Right.
Yeah. But also like really knowing how to figure out the things that you're not okay with also. I think that defining what failure or boundaries look like, where those edges are, can save you from like making unnecessary mistakes, even though mistakes are necessary and the learning process must involve failure, or accepting failure. I think that like knowing yourself enough to know what you will absolutely say no to can be a really good way of learning about what direction you want to grow in, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people think that, well, particularly I thought this as well. So I'm just going to speak about my beliefs here for a minute. Well, I mentioned Buddhism. I consider myself to be a Buddhist. I, for a long time, was agnostic, and then I became Taoist because I discovered that a lot of Taoist thought was right in line with the way that I was already attempting to live. The thing that turned me out about Taoism was there's a lot of mysticism involved. And it's the same way in Buddhism. There's a lot of mysticism inherent in it as well. I mean, they came from cultures, they grew and flourished within cultures, so they're going to be cultural. But the belief that I had in Buddhism for a long time was that it was this sort of religion of guilt. This idea that, oh, everything is suffering and everything sucks and that, whatever. And so that's why I was Taoist, because Taoism is all about sort of not really positivity, but sort of radical acceptance of the way that things are and the way that the world works, and sort of flowing within that rather than going, against the grain, the sort of natural way, so to speak. It wasn't until I started doing more research that I realized that my thoughts and feelings were really more Buddhist than they were Taoist. It was early Buddhist. To sort of paraphrase the story, Siddhartha, who went on to become the Buddha, for people who don't know what I'm talking about, was a man who was a member of royalty and was always sheltered his entire life, and then had this sudden realization where he realized that suffering exists and people were dying and people got sick and all of this, and he appealed to the gods, plural, of India to solve this problem. And so he prayed and did what he could, but eventually came to realize that the gods couldn't or wouldn't solve these fundamental ideas about human suffering and the reasons that we, suffer not just externally but internally with fear and attachment and things like that. Early Buddhism, if you really look into it, it's more along the lines of a medical diagnosis and a medical practice rather than a religion. It's really kind of a self-help case. It really goes something like the acknowledgement that suffering exists. So it is possible to be sick, and then the realization that I am sick, that I do suffer, and then the realization that the suffering is caused by specific things that can be named and described. And so here we have a diagnosis of what's wrong with us. Those things could be attachment, diversion, attachment to people and things, attachment to situations, essentially wanting things to be different than they are. And then it goes on to talk about that there is a solution to that problem. So now we're writing the prescription. And these are the steps that you can take to recognize within yourself these issues, and the ways that you can go about fixing them. And of course, they'll never be truly fixed. But I really enjoyed the way that it was set forth as a very experiential process of looking inward and saying, what are the things that I'm suffering with? What are the things that I have problems with in life? What are my fears? What are the things that I'm attached to that give me sort of conditional reactivity, where I have these programmed ways of expressing anger or fear or attachment or whatever. And how can I, A, come to radically accept the way that I am, and B, plan my interaction with the world to have as possible. And that's where I loop back to what you were talking about in terms of looking inward to understand where our boundaries lie, the things that we are and are not okay with. There's a really wonderful, I think she's a psychiatrist and also a practicing Buddhist and teacher named Tara Brach, who has a really wonderful podcast. I don't listen to it because I can't stand to listen to her voice. It's so calming that it drives me crazy. Because I usually listen to podcasts while I'm doing stuff, and I just want to curl up in a corner and be like soothed when I'm listening to her stuff. But it's amazing. But she has this concept that she calls radical acceptance, which I think is a really profound idea of really looking at who you are, the way that you interact with everything around you, your relationships with not just people, but things like money, with certain, aspects of society that may grate you the wrong way, and understanding why you have the reactions that you do to those things so that you can be compassionate with yourself and learn a more kind and compassionate way of interacting with the world, and kind of exhibiting self-care tactics at the same time. Yeah, that has been pretty transformational, especially with all this crazy shit going on. Yeah. I have radically accepted that shit is going bonkers and that a lot of people are probably going to die and that we're all going to get sick to some degree. And that allows me to have a reduced level of anxiety about the whole thing and a lot more compassion for myself and other people as we're going through this shit. Because none of us have ever done this before, I told my mom recently and she was like, I've never seen anything like this ever. I mean, that's a pretty big deal. And I think as much as I think people are trying to kind of sweep it under the rug and drink away those anxieties or sort of drown to the droning noise of the television, there's definitely this collective level of anxiety and fear about all of this. But we can take steps to sort of to mitigate that and to make it easier to interact with each other through all of it.
I really like that you see Buddhism as sort of like a way to order your life, or like a way to understand yourself, and it's not necessarily something that you made up. I kind of see an indigenous perspective as what organizes my way of thinking about the world in a way similar to that. One of the things that I've been thinking a lot now is that, we are all one body, right? We share so much, even unknowingly, that it really affects our biology. But more than that, just thoughts and things like that. So when you mention self-care, our responsibility right now for this like one body is to really take care of ourselves and to find what it is that, like, maybe it is this radical acceptance, and maybe it is prescribing the things that like we really need to work on, and figuring out what kind of person is I am that can contribute to the health of this body in a way. It's not going to be fighting this virus, and I'm also kind of concerned by all of this, like wiping down all of the surfaces everywhere. What kind of super bugs are we creating with this? I'm not entirely convinced that this is going to be the last time that something like this is going to happen. And yeah, maybe organizing our way of living to incorporate more of these sort of perspectives would be
Yeah,
good.
I definitely, excuse me, I need to reinflate this piece. There's a cool thing about stuff that's slipcast is it's real squishy right now when it comes out, and it's hollow. So it came out of the mold with a dent in it right there.
Right,
And
right, right.
I've just poked a hole in the end, and I'm
Oh, and
basically blowing it up like a balloon
nice.
to get it out as much as possible, and then I'll go back and do the smoothing and everything later. But yeah, I definitely agree with you. This is not the last that we're going to see of this. I think it's only going to get worse. I mean, the climate is getting worse. We can argue until we're blue in the fucking faces about whose fault it is, but the fact is that shit's changing, and if we don't change the way that we live, it's not going to end well. Let's up the ante and talk about what could possibly come next with all of this change in temperature. There's who knows how many viruses, bacteria, whatever that's frozen all over the world that hasn't seen the light of day in millions of years. The permafrost is melting, and there's a whole bunch of shit sealed up in there. It's gonna come out. We can either start now, really building support systems and building a society that functions in such a way that people come first and profits come later to a certain extent. But if we keep rolling along the way that they are, we're going to crash and burn in such a bad way. And that's really the biggest issue to me right now is the larger picture. It's, yes, this virus is a problem. We're experiencing a pandemic for the first time in, 100 years or something like that. Natural disasters are only getting worse. Our ability to cope with them is getting more and more difficult because there's more of them, more frequently, more dramatic. I mean, if that doesn't give you the sort of kick in the ass to rethink the way that things are going, I don't know what will. And again, because we have so many people that are like cheering some of this shit on, don't want anything to do with a solution for making it better for other people. Like, if you want to go to heaven, that's awesome. Can we not burn everything and everyone in the process of you getting there? Like, let's have a little bit of separation here, because not all of us are sort of in the same boat.
Right. I am not volunteering to sacrifice myself for the economy, and nor do I think that.
Nor am I.
All right. So, yeah. Well, it's been like an hour and a half of this conversation. So I'm stoked about it. I don't want to take up too much of your time because I know you're working. Is there anything that you think we haven't covered? Anything that you might want to do?
Things that we can all do to support each other right now. If you know a small maker, do business with them, talk to them, be stoked about the thing that they're working on, show your support, share, whatever you can do is better than nothing at all for all of us. I mean, There's been a couple of days where I had 0 sales, and one comment where someone was just super stoked about something, like, that makes a difference between chugging along or just throwing in the towel for the day and being like, fuck everything. I think we all definitely need to just kind of check in on each other, have a little more compassion, be as helpful as we can, and make stuff. Write things, draw things, interact with other makers, be creative. Creation is absolutely the most beautiful thing that could come out of all of this. I have a business. You can go buy things from it if you want. If you don't, that's fine. I don't really care. I'm more concerned about just how all of us as an industry are going to come out the other side of this, because it's rough. People are going to go back to restaurants. They're going to go back to eating. But let's be real. There are not going to be as many body jewelry companies as there were last year. There are not going to be as many studios as there were last year. And when the ones that do still exist reopen, shit's going to be different. Life is not going to be the same as it was before. But we can figure it out. We're a smart bunch. So, to everybody that's listening, just do what you can. Support your makers, support the industry. Smile and try not to have too hard of a time.
Jared, thank you so much for taking this time to just have this conversation with me. It's always really nourishing to be able to do this with you. I can't wait to share space with you and maybe share a meal with you and be able to do this in person and give you a hug, and maybe one day we can celebrate our birthdays together. I have a lot of love for you and a lot of admiration. So I wish you the best, and the best for you and Suzanne and your family. And, hopefully we'll catch up again sometime soon.
Thank you, Luna. I appreciate it. The admiration runs both ways. Absolutely. I appreciate your time, the ability to come and rant. I'd say and ignore everything that's going on, but we just kind of rehashed everything that's going on. But thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, and have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.